Optimal minimal.
At this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking.
Can I answer your personal question?
Now would seem an appropriate time.
What if I did the opposite?
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over metal endoskeleton.
Tim Ferriss Show.
This episode is brought to you by FreshBooks. FreshBooks has become the go-to cloud accounting software for literally millions of small business owners who found a faster, more efficient, and much less stressful way to deal with their numbers. And ultimately, this helps you to focus on what you are best at. It is used by many of the fastest growing startups I've invested in or advised, and it's equally used by many of the best freelancers I work with on a daily or weekly basis. It is one of the easiest ways to send invoices, get paid, track your time, and track your clients. If you're self-employed and managing business sometimes means wrestling with spreadsheets, crumpled receipts, and other scattered pieces, FreshBooks can really help. FreshBooks allows you to do many, many different things very easily. Preparing and sending a polished branded invoice takes about 30 seconds. You can set yourself up to receive online payments from your clients in about 2 clicks, which on average will get you paid twice as fast. Their new proposals feature means you can include a project summary and timeline as part of your estimate. There are many, many other things. Tracking your time. The quick proposals that I mentioned, formatting free, super easy, late payment reminders so you don't have to chase people, automated expenses, sharing files and messages with your clients, award-winning customer service. They are extremely responsive, the interface is super intuitive, and there's almost no learning curve. So, in short, it's easy, it saves you time. And right now, FreshBooks is offering an unrestricted 30-day free trial for all of my listeners. To claim yours, check it out. Go to freshbooks.com/Tim and enter Tim Ferriss in the How Did You Hear About Us section. And that is funky spell TIMFERRISS. So again, go to freshbooks.com/Tim and enter Tim Ferriss in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Check it out. This episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible provides an unbeatable selection of audiobooks, including bestsellers, how-to, mysteries, thrillers, memoirs, and more. I've used Audible for many years, and I have a few audiobooks to recommend right off the bat. Number 1, Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. So listen to the book that caught the attention of Spielberg enough to get made into a major film. The writing is fantastic. The Tao of Seneca by Seneca the Younger. This is a collection of letters, my favorite compilation of letters of all time that I've recommended the most of all the books I've ever read. And The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This is the fiction book that I use to convert nonfiction purists into fiction lovers. I like the version that Neil reads himself, but that's just me. He has a hypnotic voice. I also recently enjoyed Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, which was recommended to me by best-selling author Neil Strauss. Make sure to get the audiobook version, and you will recognize it by the peace sign on the cover. And as an Audible subscriber, you can choose 3 titles every month, 1 audiobook and 2 Audible originals you can't hear anywhere else. And there's some really, really cool stuff among the Audible originals. You can listen on any device, anytime, anywhere, at home, at the gym, while you're cooking, on your commute, or wherever. I often listen to audiobooks when I'm walking my pooch or on the way to the gym, so on and so forth. You'll also enjoy easy audiobook exchanges. In other words, if you don't like what you buy and you're like, I have buyer's remorse, you can swap it. Rollover credits. So if you don't use credits in a given month, they roll over into the next. And an audiobook library you keep forever, even if you cancel. This last part is important. Unlike, say, a streaming or rental service, with Audible, you own your books, even if you cancel your membership. And right now, for a limited time, you can get 3 months of Audible for just $6.95 a month. That's $6.95 a month. And that is also more than half off the regular price. So give yourself the gift of listening. And while you're at it, think about giving the gift of Audible to someone on your list. For more, go to audible.com/Tim, T-I-M that is, audible.com/Tim, or text Tim, T-I-M, to 500-500. Why, hello, boys and girls. This is Tim Ferriss, and welcome to another episode of The Tim Ferriss Show, where it is my job each and every episode, this one included, to interview and dissect world-class performers of all different types: business, sports, chess, entertainment, music, sometimes folks who span many multiple disciplines, and this is one of those cases, in my mind at least. We have Dave Elitch, Sitting across from me, Dave. How are you?
I'm great, man. Happy to be here.
On Instagram and Twitter and elsewhere, at Dave Elitch, Elitch, DaveElitch.com. Instagram would be probably first choice for checking him out. And I'll read the bio, and then I have all sorts of questions about the bio. But I think before I get into that, it's helpful to, perhaps as context for some folks, mention what I said to my girlfriend last night, who asked me, fairly, who is Dave? Why is he in the house? Not in an accusatory way, more out of curiosity. And you were helping to set up my first ever drum kit.
Yep.
After many, many misfires, which we won't get into right now. There are a lot of people very, very high on drugs who will volunteer to help you assemble kits. Turns out they don't follow the directions very well. And I wanted her to hear you play, just to tool around after we had consumed many pounds of pork and biscuits and all sorts of other Texan health food.
Yes.
And she had asked me at some point the day before, mostly as a hypothetical question, but also she was very curious. I wonder who Annie goes to for relationship advice. And Annie, in this case, is a very well-known relationship coach / therapist. Like, who does the relationship coach go to for relationship advice? And I use that as a bridge to say, well, many of the musicians you think of, many of the best drummers you might see on stage go to Dave as sort of the drumming whisperer / like mechanic fixer.
Yes.
Among many other things. So let's jump into the bio. But for those people who are listening and who are thinking to themselves, well, I really don't know anything about drumming. I really don't know anything about music. This is an audio only format. I'm not going to be able to watch Dave smashing on his kit. We are going to jump across all sorts of different topics. So fear not. But let's get into the basic bio. So Dave Elitch first garnered attention with his band Daughters of Mara's debut album I Am Destroyer in 2007. Very appropriate debut album name for a lot of reasons. But his time touring with the American progressive rock band the Mars Volta in 2009-2010 is what really put him on the map, and certainly put you on my map, which we can get to. He has since worked with Miley Cyrus, Justin Timberlake, M83, the 1975, Juliette Lewis, Big Black Delta, and many, many others. He conducts masterclass lectures worldwide, and in fact, you are going to be conducting a masterclass tomorrow here in Austin, Texas, which is exciting, and is a regular in the LA session scene. And I want to come back to a bunch of vocab here that we can dissect, including performing on film scores for many major motion pictures, and I have questions about that. As an educator for the last 20 years, which for people who have listened to this podcast for a while, is part of what makes you so interesting to me, is not just the ability to perform, but the ability to transmit and to break down and to convey and to demystify. Let's back to the sentence. As an educator for the last 20 years, Dave has developed a reputation as the technique body mechanics specialist who has helped many of the world's top players and educators overcome physical and mental plateaus at his private studio in Los Angeles. And your brand new online course, Getting Out of Your Own Way, which is perhaps the best title of any course I've ever encountered, is available at DaveElitch.com. I have checked it out. It is fucking awesome.
Thank you.
And I have spent a lot of time thinking about teaching. I've spent a lot of time thinking about learning, and I'm by no means a musician, but have also digested a fair amount of material related to drumming, and cannot recommend it highly enough. I thought we could start with your t-shirt that you're wearing right now. And it's a t-shirt that I liked so much at one point when we hung out in LA and smashed on some drums and then ate a bunch of Himalayan yak, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
I asked you where I could get one of these shirts.
Yep.
So could you describe for people what you're wearing at the moment and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm wearing one of my t-shirts that I, make and are available on my website that, that say slow down on the front and do it again on the back. And it came from me having to say that over and over and over again to people as I was teaching them. So I just got tired of yelling at people saying the same shit over and over again. So I just point at my shirt now and I just go, come on, slow it down. Because so many people, it's not about what you're trying to learn as much as it is about how you approach learning it. which is obviously a universal concept. And so many people try to just rush through things so quickly. And especially when you're doing something that's so physically and mentally demanding as drumming, if you don't approach it slowly, your brain has no idea what your body's doing. So all these people try and rush through something and they physiologically have no idea what's going on. And also do it again because the sheer amount of repetition you have to do to really plug in that muscle memory. And it's fun. I made it just kind of as a joke, kind of, you know, and then people would come up to me on the street and be like, "Oh, I'd love that shirt," because people get whatever sort of meaning they want.
It's the Rorschach ink blot test.
Yeah, absolutely. People love it and they get whatever they want out of it. And it can mean all sorts of different things, you know?
And this, I think, also highlights for me a difference between a really critical difference in learning anything, or several critical differences. One is developing a skill versus demonstrating the skill, and you could apply that to, say, strength development versus display, right? Competing in, say, powerlifting versus training for powerlifting, and in this case, I think maybe a good contrast that comes to mind would be last night, sitting down at this electronic drum kit, my first kit of that type that I've ever used, and playing with the basic posture and body mechanics, right? So you would ask me to relinquish control of my arm and provide dead weight, and to do the same with my leg, to try to ensure that, for instance, when using and I never know if I should call it a kick or a bass or
same thing,
something else, kick or bass drum, or pedal rather, that I would be using my hip as opposed to getting wickety whack with my ankle or other articulation. Right? And in aiming to do that, ensuring that I'm not leaning back like I'm in an Easy Rider, because that creates all sorts of instability. And it was incredible to me, but not surprising given my time with you, that within about 120 seconds, you took one of my greatest sources of discomfort sitting at any kit, which was feeling like I had to be kind of balanced on my left ass cheek to make the bass pedal work properly.
Yeah.
And you remove that, so now I could have a little bit of anterior pelvic tilt. And for people who are wondering what that means, imagine your hips are a glass of wine. If you pour wine out the front, that's anterior pelvic tilt. Posterior pelvic tilt would be pouring wine out the back. And so having a little bit of tilt forward so that I can feel my sits bones on the stool, which you also helped me to do by taking a weight plate, because it was in the garage and the gym is also there, and putting it on top of it. So you diagnose that very quickly, and then we practice a very slow, basic sort of AC/DC rock. Money beat. The money beat.
Yeah.
And in doing that, we were able to focus on some really fundamental grips and so on in a very slow fashion. But the video that introduced you to me has a number, it turns out, of stories associated with it that I hadn't heard. It seems like a lot of people have come to find you through this video. So I'd love to tell people about it. And I think it came about because I was on Twitter at God knows what unholy hour, and was thinking about drumming, and I've always been fascinated by drumming. So I asked something along the lines of, like, who is a beast drummer who is also a good teacher? And somebody threw a link up to this video. What is the video?
So the video is me playing with the Mars Volta at a Big Day Out festival in Sydney, Australia in 2010, early 2010. And I would videotape all of the shows that we played. I'd set up a little camera behind me, because when you're in the heat of battle, you know, as you could say, you have no idea how it's actually coming across. So if I backtrack a little bit, with this situation and a lot of situations that I get called for, I've sort of developed this reputation as a bit of a mercenary, in that, like, when someone breaks their arm or someone gets fired or someone needs someone to do a tour, like last minute, no rehearsals, little rehearsal, whatever, they call me and I have to learn everything last minute. And it's funny. I've been
The cleaner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, with the Mars Volta, with Miley Cyrus, with 1975, with M83, you walk into a room, you go, nice to meet you guys. And you might run through the set once, and then you're playing in front of 15, 20, 30,000 people. And it's a very unique situation to be in. The amount of pressure is unbelievable. Because as a drummer, if you drop the ball, the whole show collapses in on top of you. It's not like, you know, guitar where you can just like, whoops, flub that, and then you can just kind of keep playing.
Do it twice and you're playing jazz.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with drumming, if you drop the ball, like the whole show caves in on you. So the Mars Volta was, you know, the first big situation that I was in like that. I got that gig when I was 25. They called hundreds of people to do it. People are sending in video auditions and all kinds of stuff. And when they asked me to do it, I said, yeah, sure. You know, in your head, it's one of them. I'm sure you've had this experience before. They're like, great, this sounds great. Do you want to do it? And in my head, I'm like, no. And then I was just like, yes. The yes just comes out of your mouth. And I feel like every important life decision I've ever made, that happens. And it's super important to just do it, no matter how.
Grow wings on the way down.
Yes, exactly. And so I flew to Europe, met the band. We ran through the 2.5 hour set twice, and then we're on tour. And this is like, for people who aren't familiar with the band, it's extremely complex music. Lots of like Omar, the guitar player, lots of hand signals and eyebrows and you know, cues. And
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, you have
so he's like a Major League Baseball catcher.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, there's a long drum solo every night. So you have to really be on point. So I would set up a camera behind me every night to just be like, I need to know what this actually sounds like. Because in the heat of the moment, you could think you're killing it, and then you watch a video and you're like, ugh, whoops. Or the opposite's also true always. I could be like, I really, you know, that didn't sound good at all. And then I watch the video and I'm like, oh, that was actually okay. So that level of cognitive disconnect is in that scenario is huge. So I would go back to my hotel room after the show and watch the video and, you know, take mental notes about things that worked and things that didn't work. And for me, it's always been very important to put on a visual show. There's nothing worse than going to see a show and just watching someone looks like they're doing their taxes.
Why do you think this particular video, and we'll put it in the show notes, so for people who want to see it, you can just go to tim.blog/podcast, and it'll be right in the show notes, so you can find the link. But if people wanted to Google this, is there anything in particular they should search for?
You just type in Dave Elitch drum cam or just Dave Elitch, and it's going to pop up at the top somewhere.
It's one of the very first videos. Why do you think this video, and it's related to where you were going, I think, but why do you think this video caught on in the way that it did?
Because I'm going apeshit.
Fucking berserk.
Yeah. Standing up, kicking stuff over, you know, like just going nuts.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's really important to put on a show so people are like, holy shit. What is this is insane. You know? And so, yeah, I'm standing up and hitting super hard. And it's visually entertaining. But the most important part of that is the playing has to be happening. If you go nuts and then you screw something up, there's no point.
Yeah.
So the playing has to be on point, and then I'm going to stand up and kick something over, and you know.
Before you had your first, whether it's your first performance with the Mars Volta, so you've gone through the set twice.
Yeah.
You're in Europe.
Yeah.
Or wherever you are in the world.
Yeah.
What is your self-talk or your prep before going out on stage to play with this band?
Yeah, so you'll be into this because there's a lot of note-taking.
Yeah, I'm already into it.
So this is something that I do with a lot of people that I work with, just showing them how to properly chart out a song. Because so many people write out way too much nonsense, and then it's way too much to navigate. And learning music at the last minute and having to play it is, that does happen, quite a bit, whether it's like a coffee house or a huge show or whatever. So most people will write out everything and then they go to look at it and they have no idea what they can't read their handwriting. And so meaning like what I do with people is it's just the roadmap. You're not writing out notation. You're not writing out. It's just like intro, 8 bars, verse, 16 bars, chorus, 16. It's just that. That's it. And I might say where my right hand is, ride cymbal, crash, hi-hat, but it's very minimalistic. And so I made those charts for all the songs, and I would go through. It's all about how you approach this stuff, right? So a lot of people would go, I'm going to play through the set list, just bang, 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 down the line. But you're constantly distracted. You're constantly switching. The target's moving, so you can't get deep. So what I would...
Why is the target moving?
Because you're switching songs all the time. So what I would do is I would take the first song in the set list, and I would have my notes and the music, and I would play through it as many times as it took for me to be like, I know this really well, but the same thing on repeat. Most people would just go, I'm just going to go through the set, and then it's
now,
like...
do the by the songs changing, you mean that show to show? Or
No. I mean like within the set list itself. So someone would play like the first song, and then the second song, and then the third song all in a row.
Right.
And then they can't remember anything because they're working on all the songs at the same time.
It's linear.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's also just because we've both had a fair amount of caffeine, so I feel like we can just make use of that caffeine now. This is also a reason why certain mnemonic devices work better than others. For instance, if you use what is sometimes referred to as a memory palace, in which has been used for thousands of years. Cicero used it for memorizing speeches, among other things, where you could take... This is also how a lot of memory competitors memorize shuffled decks of cards, is they will memorize, say, pairs of cards as interacting images and place them along a familiar route. Right? So walking from their front door to the grocery store or something like that. But one of the challenges with that is if you want to get to the 12th item and recall that 12th item, you have to run through the list. And similarly,
Yes.
if you're only memorizing or getting familiar with a playlist or a set from 1 to 12 or whatever the number is, and then all of a sudden I'm just imagining like the lead singer's like, fuck it. I'm feeling we should just go to 5. And you're like, I'm not ready for 5.
Totally. That's a very real thing. And that's a real thing also when people are doing method book work, like out of a drum book, let's say. Like I might have them learn the entire page. This happens all the time. And I'm like, cool, let me hear you start from the end.
Yeah.
And they're like, So that actually is a very important point, and that comes later in the process, at the end of the process. So I will just go through one song over and over and over and over and over again until I know it really well. And this is huge. Practicing not in regards to time, but in regards to goals. So the amount of people who go to music school and they go, yeah, I practice 8 hours a day. Like, it's not about how much time. It's about what you're getting done and having specific goals and writing that down and go, I need to get this from here to here. Once I get that done, I'm done. Check, moving on. A lot of people go, I need to work on this thing for an hour. That doesn't mean anything. It's not a tangible goal. An hour for you and an hour for me are completely different. One person could get it in 20 minutes. Another person takes 2 hours. So, and it's unbelievable how everyone structures things in terms of time.
How do you know when you have a song?
It's a good question. I don't know if I can put that into words.
What does it feel like?
It feels like you've given a lot of talks, right? You rehearse it enough and you're like, yeah, I don't need these notes. I know, you know it in your core.
Yeah.
It's like when you memorize your times tables or whatever. It's that same type of thing. You don't have to like gear up to get it going.
Someone could like slap you in the face to wake you up and be like, do this.
Yeah.
And it would just come out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's in your bones.
Yeah.
And I prepare in that regard like an insane amount, like a ridiculous amount. So I'll play the song, I don't know, like 5 or 10 times with my notes. And then I'm starting like, okay, I think I got it now. Then I'll put my notes away and just play. No, sorry. Then I'll play with just the notes, no music. And then I'll play.
As you're saying, so you're accompanying the music first with your notes.
Yes. And then when I get comfortable, the next step,
turn off the music
and just play with the notes. And then the next step is music, no notes. And then the final step is just a click track, nothing else. So just a metronome.
Click track metronome.
Yeah. So I'm hearing nothing. And I have to know it so well that I can get through the whole song in my head, hearing everything. And that's an insane amount of work. But the deal is when you get on stage and there's 30,000 people screaming, and like with Miley, like people throwing bras and underwear at me, like you're like
better than batteries and tomatoes, I guess,
or beer bottles. Yeah. Like at that moment, you have to know everything so well that that's not going to phase you. So it takes a long time, and I'm in there for 10 or 12 hours at the beginning. But that type of preparation is huge. And what's funny is when I went to Amsterdam to rehearse the set with them, I set up an extra floor tom on my left side, which you normally wouldn't do that. They're on your right side. Mm-hmm. And were you going to say something?
No. I was just going to. I was going to say, for maybe you could just explain what a floor tom is.
Yeah. So toms. Interesting. It's explaining this. Man, how would you explain this to a?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to do a poor job.
Yeah, great.
I'll take I will do a terrible job, but it's easy for me to come at this with beginner's eyes because I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. So if people hear the kind of like snap of a like the generally, please feel free to call bullshit on any of this.
No, you're good.
Like that, you're going to be hearing, say, a snare drum, right? And when you look at drummers and they have their hands seemingly crossed, they're hitting the hi-hat and then they're hitting the snare with the other hand, and that's part of the lifeblood of any kind of like rock beat, right?
And the
like
kick and the kick drum
and
with
the
their
kick.
foot.
So it's like
exactly.
That is the hi-hat and the snare.
Yeah.
And then if you were to hear a drummer say travel left to right, assuming they're right-handed, like digga 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 digga. When you hear that digga 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 digga, that part is very often going to be a floor tom.
Perfect. I couldn't have done that better myself.
You are right-handed.
Yes. So you have a rack tom up top, straight in front of you, which is going to be the higher pitch, like do do do, and then you go down further, and you get bigger drums, which are sitting on the floor, floor toms, right?
Yeah. So having those on the left is not
normal.
Not normal.
Yeah.
So why did you do that?
So I put it on my left so I could put my notes on the left. And didn't think anyone would see him. And I go to the bathroom after the first set, and I come back, it's all gone.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah. And I was like, and the bass player's like, it's cool, man. You got it. It's all good. You don't need those. And I didn't.
You're like, thanks, bass player who's done this set 400 times. But
exactly. Yeah. It's okay. Great.
So I want to just note something for folks. And I'm so glad we got into this, because that particular way that you laid out your progression for practicing a song is nearly identical to how a lot of the best public speakers also prepare their keynotes. And they will say, take a keynote, and I learned to do this as well, but I was borrowing from other people. And instead of doing, let's just say it's for the sake of simplicity, a 60-minute keynote, rather than trying to give the 60-minute keynote from start to finish, they'll break it into, say, 4 pieces.
Yep.
Or what they'll do, and this is something I started to model, is because the beginning and the ending is so important, actually breaking out like the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes. So you have, say, 5 minutes. Let's just make it simple. If it's say a 40-minute talk, this will make the math a little easier. Like first 5 minutes, then you have 3 10-minute sections in the last 5 minutes, and to practice each one of those individually as opposed to in sequence.
Yes.
And initially not paying attention to time, although having some rough idea of the total length, and then recording, listening to it, making the sort of post-game analysis edits necessary. And then also at a later point, I remember when I was, and I picked this up from someone as well, when I was practicing, you're talking about the bras and the panties and everything. When I was preparing for my TED Talk about a year and a half ago, which was going to be opening session, main stage, nervous as fuck. And just as a side note, I'm sure you have a million of these, so I'd love to hear some of these war stories.
Sure.
But there's this area behind the stage at TED, it's called something hilarious like the Zen room or the chill out room, where the people who are on deck, like the 3 or 4 speakers who are on deck, are meant to hang out there, and they're little misters and like cold water and so on. And you walk in there, and at least when I walked in there, it was some of the most polished speakers in the world basically freaking the fuck out. And I was like, I need to leave here now.
This isn't helping.
I need to leave right now. This is like, being in the water with Bear Grylls and all these survival experts, and they're losing their shit because there are like great white sharks in the water. You're like, I can't, this is not helpful. I need to not be here. But one of the things that I'd done in the last week or so of preparation was to load myself up on way too much caffeine, like 3 or 4 coffees, before giving dress rehearsals to strangers at my friends' companies. I would have them call in people during lunch hour, and I would give a rehearsal in front of people who really probably didn't particularly want to be there.
Sure.
Not a super warm crowd.
Sure.
Who don't care about my feelings particularly.
And you're all jacked.
And I'm jacked to try to simulate the adrenaline
Smart.
that I would feel when
smart.
I actually got out there.
Yeah.
So in any case, I don't want to brain vomit on you too much.
No, it's all good. That's what we're here for.
Reserve some of my brain vomit for later. But the point being that progression you use applies to so many things. And well, you know what? We're gonna come. You can see me fondling these fondlings is a strange word, but these gifts, people, get your mind out of the gutter that you gave me, which I do want to talk about.
Sure.
So you've followed this progression song by song. You've gone through the set twice.
Yep.
Hour before you get on stage, what does that hour look like? For that particular mercenary, gig.
It's extremely stressful. You're waking up in the middle of the night going, how does that bridge go? Like, like freaking out because you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, and it's extremely stressful. In a lot of these situations, it's funny. I was thinking about how to sort of present this to the layman, and it's like your first day on the job. It's some really. You got like a giant promotion, or like you're at a new company, different title, different role, and you roll in and you meet everyone. You pick 5 random people out of the office, and you say, "Great, you guys are going to go on stage in front of 30,000 people together. You just met, or you're going to spend the next month in a bus together." Waking up next to each other. It's a very weird situation. And who knows how that's going to work out as far as personalities and everything. So, yeah, but the hour before the show, I've done like the Sam Harris guided meditation. I just go to an area by myself and sit down and breathe and just try and stay as relaxed as possible.
This is the 10-minute?
Yeah.
So for people who don't know, so Sam Harris, neuroscience PhD, also very well-known author. I think it's just samharris.org, 2 R's, 1 S, has a number of really good guided meditations. So you will have done that.
Yeah.
Is that the morning of? Is that right before?
Both. If I'm feeling really anxious, I'll do it right before. One of the things that took me years of touring to figure out is a lot of people will drumming is an incredibly physical instrument, especially with how hard I can hit at times. And you have to really treat yourself like an athlete. And a lot of people will just sit there and warm, quote unquote, warm up like on a rubber pad and kind of gingerly hit it around for 10 or 15 minutes. And then they go out on stage and their feet are cold. So I started bringing a jump rope on tour with me. And I was just like, oh my God, how did I not figure this out earlier? And so I skip rope for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and that gets the blood flowing. So when I walk out on stage, I feel like I'm 3 songs in already, which is a game changer physiologically. So I'll do that. Kind of gets your head in the zone because skipping rope is the same. It's the same exact thing as playing a musical instrument in terms of focus. It's like a detached focus. If you think about what you're doing, you use a different part of your brain and neurologically, and you'll screw up whatever you're doing if it's a highly learned, embedded task, right? So if you're skipping rope and you think about what you're doing, you'll hit your feet and screw it all up. If I'm playing a show, I have to either be totally zenned out, not thinking about anything at all, or I have to be like thinking about what I'm eating after the show, or like doing laundry or whatever. I can't think, oh, here comes this part, or like right, left. I'll immediately bungle whatever I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So, but skipping rope, it gets my head in that mindset, and it also gets me warmed up. So yeah, it's just a lot of pacing. Well, I don't drink coffee or Red Bulls or anything because I know my heart rate's already going to be insane. So I try to actually not do that. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
Do you have anything any particular rituals or things that you say to yourself before you go out? Or if you are, alternatively, do you take either or both of these? When you're talking to a professional who perhaps is really nervous about a tour they're about to do or gigs that they're doing, what's your advice to them right before they go out?
My advice is what I try to live by, in that if you put the time in and you know the material, there's nothing to be nervous about because you know what you're doing. And as soon as you get on stage, after about 5 minutes, and the adrenaline wears off, you should be comfortable because you're like, I've put in I couldn't have put more time in. Like I put the time in, I know what I'm doing. This is fine. What's really scary is when you don't have the time to put the work in. Then that's freaky, which I try to never put myself in those situations. But yeah, as long as you put the time in, and when I'm working with someone, I make sure they put the time in. And usually it's a lot of guys who have been in bands for a long time. They have like an ample amount they might have a month of rehearsals. So it's not really about, do I know this material? It's maybe some other issue. But I tell everyone to do the Sam Harris guided meditation, especially people who aren't familiar with that, because when I first started doing it, I literally had to relearn how to breathe.
The guided meditation.
Yeah, my breathing was, because I was driving to the studio, and I was recording this record with this band Anti-Mask I did with Omar and Cedric from the Mars Volta after the Mars Volta, and Flea was playing bass on it from the Chili Peppers. And I had just finished doing the Killer Be Killed record, which was a metal band I was in. And I had to learn the Miley set after being in the studio all day with Anti-Mask. So I was driving to the studio and I was white knuckling the steering wheel and I was holding my breath, and I realized, oh my God, like, am I doing this all the time?
Is this my normal?
Yeah, this is crazy. And then I started paying attention to it, and I realized I was holding my breath all the time. And when I started doing that short guided meditation, I realized, oh my God, I don't know how to breathe anymore. So I had to literally learn how to take a full breath, because I didn't, from just getting kicked in the balls over and over again in daily life, your breathing gets shallow.
Yeah.
So that was massive for me. So as far as like the rituals, that's huge. Even if I don't have time to like sit down and fully do the meditation, I'll try and get into that headspace, because if you start your day with that, you can very easily go back and access that mindset later on. It's much easier for me to go, okay, feeling stressed, like, okay, there's a full breath. Whereas like if I didn't start off my day doing that, I might not physically be able to access that right. Full breath.
You haven't limbered up.
Yes.
Psychologically and physically.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, the breathing, facial tension. Mm-hmm. Yesterday you were asking me when I was sitting at the kit about the jaw, and the mouth, and we were chatting about that last night. It's like, well, is it just from the standpoint of teaching? There's so many different skills that can be enhanced, oddly enough, by paying attention to sort of mouth, jaw, tongue relaxation. And we were chatting last night about is it best to tell someone to relax the jaw, or is that too hard? And in fact, if you ask someone to relax the tongue, do you get that entire structure to relax more easily, right? And all of which transcends music specifically.
Sure.
And this is a conversation I've had a lot with someone who's been on the podcast, Kelly Starrett, who always talks about breathing in positions. Like if you can't breathe in the position, you do not own the position. And
that's why I was so excited about doing this with you, because I knew there was going to be tons of carryover from different disciplines. And that's what I really love. And so you telling me, oh yeah, if you relax your tongue, you'll relax your whole face and your jaw. That I was like, of course, that's huge. And that's the way I'm going to present it to people from now on.
Yeah.
Because that's a better way to teach it.
You and I were having a conversation last night, romantic candlelit hot tub conversation.
Amongst ice baths.
That's true. We did ice baths, which was also a great opportunity to work on
breathing. Holy shit.
Big time.
Oh.
And we can have a round two. But we were chatting about, in part, we were talking about a lot of things, but what keeps me excited? And my answer was seeing the interconnectedness and the transferability of these types of concepts, because even if you bleed the stone and work in one area on one discipline, and you get to a point where perhaps you just feel fatigued and you want to try something else, but you're not sure if you could ever recapture the excitement you felt in the nascent stages of that first dominant skill. For me, it's been, I've realized that there are thousands of different disciplines you could be exposed to and take to, like a fish to water, because you have knowingly or unknowingly developed all of these meta skills that apply. And you gave me a few gifts that I alluded to fondling earlier. And one of them I'm holding here, and I'd love for you to just tell people what it is and why you gave it to me.
Sure. So this is a book called The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galway. It came out in 1974. And it's sort of one of those books where people are like, oh yeah, that book. It had a huge effect, and there's all sorts of spin-offs, like The Inner Game of Music actually is a book. And the amazing thing with this book is both of us have read a lot about Zen Buddhism. And the thing about Zen Buddhism is, by the very nature of what it is, it's very difficult to pin down and point at directly and define, because it's so amorphous, right? And this is the first thing I ever read where he nails it down in the context of tennis. It's easier to do that way.
Are you a tennis player?
I'm not.
This is important.
Yeah. So the book talks about essentially these two selves that we have, self one and self two. So self one is the analytical, cruel self-talk, harsh critic who, you hit the ball in the net, if we're going to stick with the tennis analogy, and self one's like, you fucking piece of shit. Like, come on, get it together. And self two is your subconscious automatic self that's just, hey, I'm just trying to make this happen here. And the whole idea is calming down the critical analytical self one, your self-talk, right? And letting self two, the automatic subconscious, take over. And if you let that happen, everything will just happen automatically. So what's interesting is what I do with so many people is very technique oriented. And this book can be described as like an anti-technique, because it's sort of the opposite way of coming about it. But what's interesting about this is with the Zen stuff, they will lead you down a path and then just leave you there a lot of times. And the brilliant thing with this book is it's very easy to understand. Anyone can pick it up and learn. You just replace tennis with any other thing, any other discipline. The brilliant thing with this book is it takes you somewhere, and then he's like, yeah, so, this is a plateau you have to overcome, and this is how you do it. And that happens multiple times.
This
in
is
book.
the problem. Here are a few approaches to resolving the
Yeah.
problem.
As a, you know, for instance, if you're really getting in your head, we'll stick with the tennis analogy, in a match, and you need a device to overcome that self-one. Because like I was saying earlier, if you think about physiologically what you're doing in terms of movement, you use a different structure in your brain and you'll botch it. So if you're serving a tennis ball, you throw the ball up and you go, I throw the ball up, then I move my you're fucked.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to hit the net every time. So in order to not do that, he'll say, focus on the laces of the ball as it's coming at you, or focus on the whop of the sound when you get like a good hit, and just focus on those things in and of themselves, and that will take you into that space. And we were talking about this last night. Everyone that talks about being in the zone or being on fire, that kind of thing, as a state that you can willingly inhabit, it's not really a thing. It's not really true. You can set the stage for it by this type of thing, but you can't willingly enter into that, or else everybody would do that all the time.
Yeah.
And when I'm having these out-of-body experiences when I'm playing music, which is what gets you to do it in the first place, sort of time slows down and unfolds in front of you, and you see what you're going to play, and
Neo backbending
it's exactly,
with the bullets flying by.
It's exactly the same thing. And that's what gets you. That's what got me hooked. That matrix thing, and you can use that in any discipline.
Yeah, and you can't, as you said, guarantee that you can follow the boot up sequence and automatically enter flow at any given point in time, but you can increase the odds.
Sure, absolutely.
You can increase the odds.
Absolutely.
And you were mentioning it in the context of, say, tennis or a tennis serve, but last night when we were tooling around on the drum kit, very similar, right? When you were asking me to note the difference in sound from, say, switching from a sort of French grip, if I'm getting this right, sort of thumb on top, to a German grip, which is, it's like all more internally
like
rotated,
flatter hand,
but using the wrists
as a whip
for I guess it was a rim shot or
that's it
on the snare drum, and asking me to really notice like the feel and the sound of it.
And what's amazing about this is we're playing an electronic kit. We're not playing an acoustic kit. So even though you're hearing sounds, theoretically, it shouldn't really sound any different because it's not real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's what's even cooler about this being on an electronic kit, is like, once we got you relaxing and getting those techniques happening and trimming the fat, your vibe and your feel was like totally different, even in that situation.
And the sound is, or the cueing into that sound or feeling, much like anyone who's played tennis, and I've played very little tennis, but knows the gratification of that proper thwack when you really hit it in the sweet spot, or anyone who's boxed and found that sweet spot on a heavy bag, acts as an anchor for the 27 biomechanical ingredients that make it up. But if you try to recall the 27 separate ingredients discreetly when you're pulling your arm back to hit the ball, you're fucked.
You hit the nail on the head, man. Yeah. And that is exactly, that's the kind of stuff that I find so exciting are those carryovers. When you hit a home run, when you smash a baseball, it doesn't feel like you did anything. Like nothing, that doesn't feel, whereas if you hit it like wonky, you're like, you know what I mean? Like, it feels terrible.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with drums. When you hit them right, the energy should be going out.
Yeah.
Not back in. And it's the same with anything else, any athletic movement.
And you gave this book, The Inner Game of Tennis, and we're going to definitely come back to this topic, but to your therapist, who's 81?
Something like that,
80-something, and very wise woman.
Yeah.
And it now has a prominent placement on her shelf.
Yeah, as a spot on her mantle, as like one of the 5 or 6 books she gives out to people regularly.
You know, I didn't ask you this because I don't think you mentioned the 5 or 6 other books, but do you know offhand any of the other books?
That Pia Melody, Facing Love Addiction, was one of them.
Pia Melody, P-I-A Melody.
And, yeah. I don't know the other ones, but
we can make that a bonus feature for the show notes.
I'll look closer next time.
So we'll put those in the show notes.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at these other two.
Sure.
Because I think they are also a fun way to dissect you a bit.
Sure.
Let's go with this one next. So this is a very small book, and I always get excited about small books.
One would not think that.
One would not think that. As every time I set out to write a 20-page children's book, it ends up being a 700-page like bludgeoning tool.
Yes.
But this is title: "The Medium is the Message." Subtitle: "An Inventory of Effects."
Yeah.
Marshall McLuhan, is
That's
that how you
it?
say it?
Yeah.
M little c uppercase Luhan, and Quentin Fiore.
Yeah.
is the graphic
Yes.
designer.
Mm-hmm.
And then produced, I didn't even notice that, by Jerome Agel, I suppose.
No.
Something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So who knows what, that's not something I typically see associated with books, so I'm not sure what that means. But tell me about this book.
So Marshall McLuhan was a really interesting and very popular social and media theorist in the 50s and 60s. So I find it really fascinating that he's not a household name now, being that media is such a massive part of everyone's life now, especially people who do their own thing. Like we have to have Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff. Like you don't have a choice, right? Mm-hmm. So I find societal issues and media and how we process and consume media very interesting. And this dude was so ahead of everyone by decades. It's almost creepy.
Just in terms of his predictive ability?
Yeah. And the interesting thing about him is he would spout off all sorts of inflammatory, crazy things, and people would get furious about certain things or pick things apart, and he would contradict himself all the time and make these grand statements. And that maybe would have been something that would have bothered me years ago, but now, as long as there are gems throughout and he hits the nail on the head in certain areas, and I can take away things that shift my perspective as a whole, that's all that matters to me. So the medium is the message. This is actually the medium as the massage, because they screwed up when they were...
Oh, that's so funny. I didn't even notice that.
I know.
That.
Well, because they screwed up when they were printing it originally, and he thought it was hilarious, and he's like, just leave it. It's fine. So it was supposed to be the medium as the message, but it's actually the medium as the massage. And he's like, that's great.
That's great. Let's keep it.
Yeah. He loved puns, and he was kind of a quirky, weird dude. So the whole idea of that phrase is that the medium with which information is submitted to you is more important than the actual information itself. So an example I like to use is something like autotune. So for people who don't know what autotune is, if you think of that Cher song, like, do you believe in life after love? Like whatever that was, 20 years ago. And it's so autotune is a software that people use to correct someone's vocal take. So if someone's vocal take is wonky, they just sort of massage it a little bit.
It's been used quite a bit in hip hop.
Yes. So what the new thing with that Cher song is they used a different key signature to auto-tune it. So it way overcorrected itself, and that's what got that weird T-Pain sort of sound.
Yeah.
And Drake, and now, so as something that was an experiment, now has currently changed the way music is. The software itself has now changed the art form, and to the point where I'll have producer friends of mine tracking someone doing vocals in their 20s, and they're like, hey, why does my voice sound weird? And they're like, that's what your voice sounds like. That's actually what it sounds like.
Uncorrected.
They expect it to sound like auto-tuned. So the technology has now affected the
Not
art
only
form.
changed the content, but also changed the perception of the raw materials.
Yeah. And you could say the same thing about, there's something called Beat Detective, which is something that drummers the world over hate. So it's the same sort of a thing for drummers. So like you can track something, record something in a studio, and then they will artificially adjust everything to a grid. And if someone's lazy about it, they just snap it to the grid, and it just sounds like it's very stiff and computer-like, because that's what it's been turned into.
Spock on drums.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, but people got used to hearing that.
Can you remove the soul from my music?
Yeah. So I've done sessions where like I'll go in and I think do a pretty good job. And then I'll hear it back, and I'm like, why did you even have me play on this? Because they just are lazy. It's more that just them being lazy and not going through and, but people got used to hearing how quote unquote perfect that is. And if someone hears something that rushes or drags or is a little bit not perfect, they're like, ooh, this is weird. And so a lot of things are beat detected to the point where it's just totally artificial now. And then
you've drained the blood.
Yes. And then the pendulum will swing back, and that's why Adele was so successful, because it was real music. And
or like Jack Johnson. Or,
exactly.
You do have the pendulum sometimes swinging the opposite direction. Is your interest in this, because I know it's not limited just to this book, right? And one I wanted to bring up, you have mentioned this to me many times, and in fact, this is a documentary series that has come up repeatedly on this podcast. I'm embarrassed to say that I still have not seen it. Adam Curtis's BBC documentary series, The Century of the Self.
Yeah.
And hyper-normalization.
Yeah.
So you've said it changed the way that you saw the world forever. And I'll just continue here. So even if you just check out these are your words, the first 20 minutes of Century of the Self, it will blow your mind. Why is... Maybe you could segue into the Century of the Self and hypernormalization. Tell me why this is so interesting to you, because this seems to be thematically something that is of great interest to you.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about Beat Detective and other things. People might assume, it's because he's a musician and it's how these things affect music. But I don't know if that's true. So could you talk about how did you find the Century of the Self? Because it has come up surprisingly frequently on this podcast. And why does it grab your attention?
My buddy Chris is a musician friend of mine, and he told me about it years ago. I think it came out in 2000, I think. I'd have to double check that. But it's the premise of Century of the Self is it starts with focusing on Edward Bernays. So Edward Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew, and he took all of Sigmund Freud's theories on the subconscious and came to the conclusion that human beings are either savage animals that are going to rip each other apart, or they can be controlled and made docile via consumerism. So
the opiate for the masses.
Yeah, it's literally that. So Edward Bernays used some of these tactics that he pioneered in propaganda for World War I. And then after World War I, he was like, we can use these in peacetime for capitalists.
Selling more detergent.
Yes. So the whole notion of you buying a pair of shoes to express your inner self was single-handedly formulated by him. So we think that's just always been around. But really before him, if people were thirsty, they drank water. If people needed it, they would wear shirts for years. And, as that dude who I'm a big fan of, Slavoj Žižek.
So we're going to come back to this.
Yeah.
Slovenian philosopher.
Yeah.
Slavoj, second name Zizek. Amazing name.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Amazing person.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah. So what he talks about, he says, if once you drink Coke instead of water, the excess is with us forever. You can't go backwards. Right. So he did interesting things like having a bunch of women smoke cigarettes. There was some sort of subconscious phallic connotation with that. But at the time, women didn't smoke. And he hired like a bunch of attractive women to smoke in like a parade or in public or something to get it like quote unquote sort of trending.
Yeah.
So the idea, so
It's
basically,
like having the celebrity wear the sneakers.
yeah, exactly. So he created focus groups, and he created the idea of PR. This is all him. So this guy single-handedly shaped America as we know it, and of course, America affects everything else in the world, up until recently, anyway. And so especially the world we live in now with Instagram and social media. He's maybe the most influential person. I mean, in terms of
Whose
society,
name most people don't recognize.
yeah, it's so it blows my mind. He should be a household name. And
This is Edward Bernays.
yes, and the documentary is
Bernays.
Yes.
For people wondering.
and the doc. And what's interesting is you would think he made himself famous via Sigmund Freud, but it was actually the other way around. He took all of his tactics and made Sigmund Freud into Sigmund Freud.
Huh.
Yeah, it's crazy. So,
That I didn't. I had no idea. That's
Yeah.
really wild.
so it's 4 1-hour episodes, and the first episode,
The Century of the Self.
Yeah, it's called Happiness Machines. That's the first episode, and Adam Curtis has a really interesting style of making these documentaries. I saw him do a talk in Los Angeles when Hypernormalization came out in 2016. And he said, these aren't really documentaries. They're kind of just things that I make. And they're almost like video essays or collages. And McLuhan talks a lot about that, presenting things as sort of a star pattern of images, because language is sometimes insufficient to convey the ideas. So it can be like a weird collage. Like you're like, what am I? Like I show this documentary to people, like, what is this? Like, it's really strange, and the music's really weird and bizarre.
Which one are you talking about? You're talking about
Sorry, I'm talking about
Hypernormalization.
Either one, anything he's made, anything Adam Curtis has made is the same style, so it's 4 1-hour episodes, and it goes all the way up till the Clinton administration, because this idea, this Edward Bernays stuff, weaves its way into politics and all sorts, and it goes into other things too. So that completely changed the way I think about everything. I think about it every day.
In what would be an example? Is it just that you're aware of the way your subconscious is being manipulated? Is it that you view other individual and collective behavior differently because you question the free will ingredient? How does it on a day-to-day basis impact how you think about things or view reality?
It's all of that. And if we're just talking about consumerism, if I want to buy something, whatever it is, like a drink or a snare drum, which I buy a lot of, or some art, which I also buy a lot of, why do I want this?
Yeah.
What's driving this? And a lot of times the answer is different than what you think it may be.
Yeah. Or what you want it to be.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times you're filling that, you're filling the void, right?
Yeah.
So, that's something that's a whole other topic, like existential angst, but
That is a big topic.
but that's why a lot of people are buying things is to make themselves feel better. But
I heard this quote not too long ago. It's actually in a collection of quotes. I love just a collection of quotes. I'm such a promiscuous quote reader.
Sure.
But there was one, and I don't know the attribution. Someone out there on the internet can certainly indicate who the proper attribution is, and I'll put it in the show notes as well. I'll write down this note: mankind existential animal quote question mark. And the quote is along the lines of, man is the only animal for which his own existence is a problem to be solved.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. That's it right there.
It's like my dog Molly does not seem preoccupied.
No,
at all.
No, she's just having a good time.
Yeah. You mentioned artwork.
Yeah.
And we're going to come back to some of the music, and we're also going to jump into some of the rapid fire questions that I love to ask, which we've known each other for quite a while, but
Sure.
I don't think I've ever asked certainly 90% of those that
Great.
we're going to be coming up on. But the artwork, I follow you on Instagram, and I love your drumming. So
Thanks.
don't take this the wrong way. I find the artwork that you discover to be fascinating.
Thanks.
And strange.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So I use your account also as a way of discovering different types of graphic design and art. Have you always been interested in visual art? And if not, how did that become what seems like an important part of your life? I don't know if it is.
Yeah, it's a very important part of my life.
So how did it become important? Why is it important?
I used to make art. I used to draw a lot and do watercolors when I was a kid. And then when I started playing drums, like really young, like 5, 6, 7. And then when I started playing drums, I didn't do anything else. Like it took my full mental capacity. So that sort of fell by the wayside. And then I hit a certain point in my career where, if you just have those blinders on and you're myopic about something because you're very, very focused and driven, you end up burning out eventually. So, and touring is incredibly stressful. So I hit a wall a few years ago. And
how old are you now?
34.
Okay. So like 31, 32.
Something like that. Yeah. And I turned to art as a sort of oblique form of inspiration.
I don't want to hijack the flow here. When you say hit a wall, is that physical fatigue? What do you mean by that?
Mental fatigue mostly. Because we were sort of talking about this last night. You get to a certain point where you check all the boxes of things that you've wanted to do. And I got to a certain point where I was like, I've done everything that I wanted to do career-wise.
Right.
Now what do I do?
Yeah.
Right. And also, I was talking to Jimmy Chamberlain about this. He's a good friend of mine, and I've been helping him out a little bit.
Who is that?
He plays drums for the Smashing Pumpkins. And we were having breakfast a few months ago, and we were talking about the same type of thing. And he was saying, yeah, and people are like, man, this is great. Your band's doing so well, or you're doing all these tours, and you're like, isn't that amazing? And I was saying, yeah, it's not amazing. I always knew I was going to do this. This isn't a surprise for me. I always knew this was going to happen. So in a way, it's hard to get to the top of Mount Everest and be like, I did it. Because you're like, well, duh, of course I did it.
Now, how much of that, when you say I knew it was going to happen, how much of that, and there's certainly could be an option C, D, and E, but how much of that is I knew it was going to happen because I knew I was really good versus I'm just doing my fucking job. Like as a professional drummer, like I am putting in the work and therefore like it is my job to ultimately do X, Y, and Z. And I did X, Y, and Z. So why would I pat myself on the back for doing my job?
Yeah, sort of both.
Or something else.
Well, it's just like
'Cause I have a lot of the latter. Like I struggle with that quite a bit.
I'm going to work harder than you are.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be the first in and the last out. And if this guy can make it work, I can certainly make it work. Mm-hmm. So it's really that sort of a thing. Like I always say this to people I'm working with. I'm saying, look, you can have a good amount of innate ability at whatever you're doing, but the person who puts the work in is always going to surpass you. And if you have a little bit of innate ability, like I think I do, and you work harder than anyone else, obviously there's a certain amount of luck involved in anything, which you can't do anything about. But there was no other option.
Yeah. And
the thing I was talking about with Jimmy is he was like, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy down to the molecular atomic level. If you're operating from that state, things will unfold in that manner because you're working in that, not like the secret kind of bullshit, like not that crap,
right.
But like and he recommended this book to me, and I have so many books I have to read. Is it like On Becoming Yourself? It's super popular right now. I'll have to look it up.
I wonder who wrote it.
I have it in my...
Is it Krista Tippett?
No, she's great though.
She is, yeah.
I'm reading this Ellen Langer book called Mindfulness, which you're going to super dig.
I've watched you carrying it around.
Yeah, it's so good. And Ellen Langer was on her podcast. That was how I found out about her.
Got it. All right. So we will follow up. So Jimmy recommended a book.
Yeah.
It may be On Becoming Something or other.
Yeah, God, I have to look it up.
What's the gist of the book? Or why did he recommend it?
It basically goes way into that in terms of a scientific vantage point, like how all of that stuff works. It's very scientific.
Now, when you say that stuff, you mean when you place yourself on a certain direction and make thousands of micro decisions that are subconsciously aligned with that direction.
Yes.
How
does that work
unfold
scientifically? Mm-hmm. Instead of some voodoo weird, I want a new car, so I'm going to put that into the universe, and then it'll just happen.
Well,
not that.
It makes me think. Again, I'm going to blame it on the caffeine, but I just like jumping around and interjecting because I'm too hyperactive. We were talking about Maria Bamford. Who's a fucking amazing comedian.
Yeah.
And at one point, she was doing this this bit on having read The Secret. And so she said, I went home and I created a vision board. And on my vision board, I had all the things that I wanted. And my sister came over, and her sister apparently is some very successful lawyer or something. And her sister comes over, very type A, and her sister's like, "What is this?" She's like, "Oh, it's my vision board." And she's like, "You have a microwave on your vision board?" She's like, "A fucking microwave? That's ridiculous. I'll buy you a fucking microwave." And then Maria's like, "Bam! Manifest!"
That's awesome.
So we're not talking about trying to make that happen.
No. No, but I haven't read it yet, so I'm kind of talking out of my ass here. But he was saying it's incredible.
How did he think it would help you, or why did he prescribe that?
Because we were talking about it anyway, and he was like, "Oh, have you read this book? That's sort of what it's all about." So I haven't. It's in the queue. I haven't gotten to it yet.
What did he share with you, or what were his thoughts on this position that you find yourself in? Where it's like, all right, I seem to have some degree of innate ability for this particular field. I was drawn to it. Mm-hmm. I've applied myself very diligently over, at this point, I guess, decades. Right?
Yeah.
And I've done what I want to do. Now what?
Well,
and you said something, I don't know if you want to debut it here or not. I said, "Oh my God, you should put that on social media just to further outsource your self-esteem."
Sure.
Which I think is like social media in a nutshell. But you said, do you want to try to take a stab at it?
I said, anyone who says do what you love for a living and you'll never work a day in your life hasn't done what they want to do for a living.
Yeah, you do anything day in, day out.
Yeah.
For decades.
Yeah.
There's a point where you're like, okay.
Even to the point where I'm doing these tours where I'm super stressed out and like, you're walking in on stage in an arena for 15,000 people, Staples Center or whatever, and you're like, after a week, once I have the show done, I'm like, whatever, making the donuts, especially if it's a pop thing, because it's literally the same thing every, if it's something more improvised, that's a little bit more exciting. But there's something that happens that I have to help people out with who are on tours for a year and a half or 2 years, and it's a pop context.
Holy shit, I didn't realize tours were that long.
Oh, yeah, dude. Fuck. Album cycle? Totally.
Oh, my God.
So you're playing the exact same thing note for note, day in, day out.
So it's like being on book tour until your next book comes out.
Yep.
Basically.
Well, and then you'll take a break.
You'll do some recording.
You'll take a break, do a new record. Yeah, but it's intense. And you're out with the same people, the same texts. You're away from your family. It's pretty rough.
Yeah.
And so something that happens to people is they're playing the same thing over and over and over again. I mean, literally this note for note. Because if you're playing a pop, like when I was doing Miley, that's a massive production. It's like 8 buses, 12 semis. The stage production is insane. I'm going up and down, above and below the stage. There's a huge video wall. She's riding a giant hot dog like 20 feet above the air in the arena. There's a lot of things that go on there. So you can't do anything different because the dancers will be like, oh, like what just happened, right? So you have people playing the exact same thing note for note for a year and a half, 2 years, and they start to lose their mind because it's so monotonous and repetitive.
Yeah, it's like the polar bear doing like the lap in the 10-foot pool in the enclosure.
Exactly. It's exactly the same thing. So what starts happening is your brain starts creating weird quagmires for you to fall into because it's bored.
What would be an example
So
of that?
like, for instance, you'll get to a certain part and you'll be like, oh, why can't I play that? It's not hard to play. Like there was a guy I was working with who has played with like Janet Jackson for a year. A lot of people. He's a fantastic drummer, and he had like some issues with his foot, and he went to see someone in Atlanta, like a neurologist, and she had some helmet that he put on because we were looking at like the technique, the physical issues, and I guess there were some parts of his brain that were like turned off, like to control the foot. It's crazy. I don't know how that technology works, but your brain will fuck with you. Yeah. So there was times at the Mars Volta or with Miley or whatever where I would be like, oh, here comes this part, and it's like, you're already dead in the water. Yeah. Or like when I was doing M83, there was one section where like I would hear the beat in the wrong place. Like
weird. You had like an auditory hallucination.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And like it was very, very, it was a very simple section. And I remember at sound check, me like going, whoa, what's going on here? This is like, and your brain is like, I need something to do. Yeah. It's crazy. So I forgot why I got on that tangent.
We were talking about Jimmy and climbing Everest and what his thoughts were on what to do.
Well, his situation, we were talking about this sort of last night. It's like, in certain situations, there aren't a lot of people you can talk to about certain things, right? So we were just kind of going back and forth at that type of thing. And the thing with him is he is in a band that's still huge. And the thing with being this is the thing that's uncontrollable in the music industry, or, there's tons of parables here, but I can work really, really hard, and it doesn't matter if my band makes it or not, in a way that if you really hit the lottery, that's totally outside of your control. So that they put in all the hard work, but that band hit the lottery. Yeah. And that is out of your control, but again, you can sort of set the stage for it. So where he's coming from, because he's in a band that is huge, is totally different from someone like me who's a mercenary. Yeah. Right. So it's
the Blackwater sniper of drumming technicians.
Yeah, totally. So it's a totally different thing. Yeah. But he's very, very intelligent and great player. Really great guy too. He's amazing. You guys would get along really well.
Yeah, I'd love to meet him.
Yeah, for sure.
How long has he been the drummer with?
He took a break for a while, and then he recently got back together with them, and they're just on tour right now doing their new record. Yeah.
There's so many tracks that just fueled me through so many parts of college.
Oh, yeah,
other
dude.
Points, Zero, Butterfly with... Bullet with Butterfly Wings.
Yeah, dude.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah,
so
I love that.
Amazing. I think we should maybe jump into some rapid fire. But we will incorporate this. Thank you for the index finger point. We're not going to miss this because you mentioned a word earlier, which is a very useful word, oblique. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about the sides of your abs, although I suppose we are. It's used in that context here. We're going to come back and talk about oblique strategies. But first, since we've consumed, I think, several black teas, several green teas, several Topo Chicos, and are working our way through a couple of cappuccinos and more green tea, we will take a short bio break and return for your listening pleasure. We'll be right back. And we're back. As promised, oblique strategies. This is a black case that is holding what looks like a deck of cards. And this deck of cards has all sorts of things written on them. The first two, which I pulled out yesterday, which were highly, highly relevant to a number of corners I've painted myself into recently, were card number 1, simple subtraction. Card number 2, what mistakes did you make last time? What are these oblique strategies?
So they're cards that Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt made together in 1975. And
who are those two people?
So Brian Eno is a super famous musician. He's done a lot of different things over the years, but he was first famous with the band Roxy Music, and he went on later to sort of pioneer ambient music.
Yes,
with music for airports.
Wait, literally music for airports?
That's what the record's called. It's called music. It's called Music for Airports. Yeah. Sorry, I should have clarified that.
I feel like they would get along with McLuhan, and the medium is the massage.
Yeah. Well, he wanted to make something that sort of neither had a beginning or an end, and you could tune in and out of, and it didn't really matter. And so he's a very interesting, brilliant person. And these are strategies when you're making anything. I mean, this is in the context of making music, but you can obviously apply them to anything. They're devices to knock you out of your present state of mind. Like you said, when you paint yourself into a corner, like, I got to get out of this.
Or you just feel like you've painted yourself into a corner.
Sure. Well, that's a whole other thing, right?
Yeah.
So there's a whole deck of cards that are very simple, minimalist suggestions, right? So the ones that you picked out, you already said, but if we pick out like just a few random ones.
Tidy up. Do something boring. The most important thing is the thing most easily forgotten. Ain't that the truth? Overtly resist change. Disciplined self-indulgence. Yeah, so these are prompts.
Yeah.
In a way, for getting unstuck or unfucked.
So, I've had a set of these for years, and I thought you would be super into these.
How do you use these cards? And I'll just buy a little bit of time because I noticed there's a description card which I hadn't noticed earlier. These cards evolved from separate observations of the principles underlying what we were doing. What we were doing, I'm imagining, is very much musically related. But sometimes they were recognized in retrospect, i.e. intellect catching up with intuition. Sometimes they were identified as they were happening. Sometimes they were formulated. They can be used as a pack, a set of possibilities being continuously reviewed in the mind, or by drawing a single card from the shuffled pack when a dilemma occurs in a working situation. In this case, the card is trusted even if its appropriateness is quite unclear. They are not final, as new ideas will present themselves and others will become self-evident.
Yeah, there you go.
How have you used these cards?
I always think about them in terms of how I'm supporting music as for the greater good, right? So a lot of times in an improvised context, these are very, very applicable because with an instrument such as drums or guitar or piano or bass where you don't have to breathe to play it.
Yeah.
You run the risk of vomit chops.
What does that mean?
It means you can just play as much as you want. If you're playing a wind instrument, you literally have to breathe. So that affects your phrasing. So you can pause. And, drumming, you don't have to do that. You can play 1,000,000 miles an hour forever.
Right.
And after 2 minutes, the listener wants to kill themselves.
That's true. There isn't as much of a... There is a biological limiter, but it's not as obvious to the listener.
No. Yeah, with saxophone or something, you have to breathe every 15 or 20 seconds. So you have to have space. And that cliche thing of it's not about what you play, it's about what you don't play, it's cliche for a reason. It's really true. Yeah. And that's something that I try to focus on a lot because if you have a lot of facility, it's very easy to just, barf all over the place and overwhelm everyone.
I'm not a musician, as I've stated repeatedly, but I remember someone said to me, music is the space between the notes. Mm-hmm. And I was like, ooh, interesting.
And with drumming, especially because you're keeping time for everyone, it's a very meditative state. A lot of people will count in between the notes and they'll be very precise about it. And I've always tried to be very zen about it and just feel the void in between the notes that you're playing. It's two totally different ways of doing it. And depending on what you're doing at the moment, one could be better than the other. But yeah, man.
So you would then give me an example if you could.
Yeah.
It could be hypothetical.
Yeah.
Like, when would you pull out this deck and be like, all right, I really feel like I need one of these cards?
So, I do a lot of the body mechanics stuff with people, and I also have people who are just like, hey, dude, give me a bunch of cool, crazy licks to play, like in song enders, that kind of a thing. Like, I did that with my buddy Stacey Jones, who's Miley's MD and drummer. And that was
MD.
how I, musical director. Sorry.
Hell of a combo. Let me finish the song, and then here's an EpiPen in the leg.
So he was like, hey, dude, I just want to get some rad song enders. It was like, great, we can totally do that. And so I showed him a bunch of licks. We had fun. And this is the kind of situation that's great for these, because people, after you work on the phrasing, after about 20 minutes, they've played everything they know. Mm-hmm. And then they're like, oh, what do I do now? So you could just pick something out of the deck. Like you just picked out Give the Game Away. And how you interpret that, you can go a number of ways, right?
It's like slow down on your shirt. Like, I mean, anyone who picks that up, if they're like, what does that mean? Be like, what does it mean to you? You can like therapize them.
Yeah, exactly. So like for me, the way I would process that is like, I'm just going to, a lot of times when you're building up solos, you don't do that. Mm-hmm. You want to lead someone in and sort of set the stage, because if you start off on...
don't give them the filet mignon as the appetizer.
Exactly. So this, to me, the way I would interpret this is I'm going to come in guns blazing and then try to work my way out of that, because that's the biggest no-no. I'm going to do that on purpose.
Right.
And then see what happens. Mm-hmm. Someone could also say, like, if you're thinking about it in a sports analogy, you could just be like, I'm just going to play the game and see what happens. Just let it happen on its own. It's not about winning or losing.
Cool. I dig it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is good timing for me.
Great.
So we've talked a lot about playing in front of huge crowds and the musicians you work with, and certainly this show tends to feature people who are very good at something.
Sure.
Or other. I would like to talk about failures or disappointments. And this is a question I really enjoy asking, which is, how has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? It could be a disappointment, or anything. But do you have any particular favorite failures or failures that come to mind that were, in retrospect, very valuable?
I've gone out for auditions for plenty of bands, and I haven't gotten gigs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just how it goes. And if you go in there and, again, you're really prepared and you fully present yourself accurately, and they don't want it, it's not the right fit, what else can you do? You might think of like, oh, I didn't get the gig, like it's a failure. But what about it's the same thing as dating, right? What if you present a fake version of yourself and then they like that, and then you have to keep doing that, and then you're like, who am I?
Yeah.
So there's plenty of situations where I go in doing the Dave Smash thing, like in that Mars Volta video, and they're like, holy shit, like Jesus Christ, like
get a restraining order.
Yeah, and it's too much, and they get freaked out. And it's just like, well, I might not be that guy all the time, but that's definitely possible.
Yeah.
A real life situation, which is what I always try to talk about, because that's the most important thing. So many people run into problems when everything's hyperbole.
Yeah.
So when I was out with the 1975, maybe a couple of years ago, George, the drummer, I've been teaching him for a while, and he broke his collarbone on tour. So it was the same type of situation.
How did he break his collarbone? Maybe it's not for family programming.
Yeah, I don't know. But he was just like,
nice.
dude, I broke my collarbone. So
good recovery. Continue.
So I was like, who knows, So he was like, can you come out here and fill in? So same type of situation. I have to learn all the music last minute. It's a big, really large venues, arenas. And I show up to Toronto, meet everyone. We have a line check on stage, which is you just make sure all the connections are working. Mm-hmm. We run through a couple songs, maybe.
The people attempting to assemble my drum kit did not do this.
Well, that was another thing. George, I'm like 5'6" on a good day, right? George is at least a foot taller than me, if not more.
Wow.
Yeah, he's very tall. He's probably like 6'9".
Holy
yeah,
cow.
He's very tall. So
Daddy long legs on that drum kit.
Yeah, long legs, long arms, long everything. So I had to rearrange his kit. A lot of times you have to sit down and just play it, which can present some problems. But I had to rearrange things because it was like impossible. And so, yeah, outdoor stage in Toronto, 10,000 people, and you just have to go for it.
Now, you said you're going through a line check. And then
So
took
line
us
check
off the reservation.
Yeah, so line check is like kick drum, snare drum, guitar, like checking everything's working, right? Mm-hmm. And then he was, Maddie, the singer, was like, can we do this song? Let's do this song. And we just did like a couple songs. And he was like, okay, great. And then it's showtime.
All right.
Yeah. And so, everyone was like, because that's the type of situation where it's a band and you have to come in. And the very difficult thing is you have to assume someone else's character.
Yeah.
And try to make everyone feel comfortable enough to where it's comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? So, they were like, yeah, have you play the parts, but like you can have some fun. And so I threw in things here and there, and they were like laughing and into it, and it was super fun. And so we did that run for about a month, and then I sat down with Maddie the singer. And he was like, man, we have to do Glastonbury and some BBC One stuff. And it's really important that this band sounds like the 1975. And right now it sounds like the 1975 with Dave Elitch. Mm-hmm. Because your personality is just huge.
Yeah.
And at the time I was like, fuck. I was so bummed because I really like Maddie. I really like George, all those guys. And I really like the music a lot. And I was just like, fuck, man. And then I was like, wait, this is like the best compliment anyone could ever give me.
Yeah.
Because having an identity is the most important thing when you're making art. And I was like, you know what? That's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And so, that was, they got my buddy Freddie, who was doing it for the week until I got there, Freddie Sheed. He's a really great drummer in the UK. They got him to do it again until George could come back. And Freddie's great. And he's a really good buddy of mine. He did a great job. And I was just, at the time, I was like so bummed. But
what helped you reframe it? Like when were you able to reframe it and view it the way?
Took a while. Took a few months.
Did you do it on your own? Did it come to clarity through therapy? What helped?
Maybe talking.
Because a lot of people don't recover from, they're not able to reframe something that might have been a very difficult time. It continues to be something that was very difficult, right?
And they just it takes them out forever.
Yeah, or just becomes this pain, this like dull ache that they revisit every time they have the memory. But you've been able to reframe it.
Yeah. I think through enough experience and through having enough success outside of that situation.
Yeah.
I can definitely see that happening if it's like that's your one shot and that's the only amount of success you've ever had. But I've done a lot of other things and I did things after that before it. And so it's like, oh, that was just that one thing. And it wasn't like, oh, you fucked it up.
Yeah.
It was just like you're too distracting.
What's the shittiest music gig you've ever had? And it could be like,
oh man,
fucking, it could be anything. It could be fucking halftime at like a Rogue Olive Garden. I don't know, like,
man, I don't know if I can answer that without getting in trouble.
Or any. Have there ever been moments when you've doubted yourself or doubted the music path, where you've just been like, fuck?
Oh, all the time.
Well, any examples come to mind? They could be super early. They could be at any point.
Well, the industry has changed so much in the past 10 or 15 years. Just the way it's structured as a business model alone makes you question things. Like, is this even a working model anymore?
Yeah.
And that changes on a daily basis. So just thinking about things monetarily, sometimes you're like, does this even make sense? Like for me, like, am I going to go out on tour and be away from home and make X amount of money when I can just stay home and sleep in my own bed and make X amount of money teaching?
Right.
That kind of a thing. And then it's like, well, do I want to teach or do I want to play music? And then it's like the grass is always greener. So all that stuff's constantly swirling around in my head. Yeah. When you're auditioning for gigs and you're like, really, that dude got the gig? Are you kidding me? And then you're like, if that's what people want, like, that's garbage. Like, and everyone else is like, oh, gross. And, like, I can't, like, that guy, dude's such a cheese ball. Like, why would they, and they're like, well, is that what people want? And then if that's what people want, why am I doing this? Because no one has good taste.
Yeah.
You can get in that whole thing. So just, totally. And I think what's very important is doing a multitude of things. I teach a lot. That's really my bread and butter. Mm-hmm. But because of that, I can be selective and learn how to say no to things because of that. So if someone calls me for
playing gigs.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if someone calls me for a tour and I heard a lot of bad things about the artist, like they're a pain in the ass, I'll be like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't have to do it. I have a lot of friends who tour and that's all they do.
They have to do it.
And they're like, God, you're so lucky you teach. I have to go out with this piece of shit right now. And it's like, and then it comes around to doing what you love for a living, and then they're like, oh, like, what's the point if you go out on the road and you're bumming? Yeah. So there's something to be said about the weekend warrior who goes to their suit and tie cubicle job and then they get out of work and they're like, yeah, I'm going to go play drums right now. And they're stoked.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for that.
Yeah.
Because it's still like a wholly special thing. And that's something that I struggle with art.
Yeah.
Because I love art so much and it's so important to me. And everyone's like, when are you going to start making stuff? And I was like, but if I start making it, then I'm part of it. And then it's like tainted.
Yeah.
In a way.
Well, it makes me think of some of my friends who are very, very successful travel writers. It's really hard for them to travel for fun because they're constantly thinking about what would the lead be? Oh, how would I describe this? Oh, maybe I should take some notes just in case. They have a very tough time experiencing travel without thinking about how they would craft the narrative.
Well, same thing for me. Like if you go on tour a lot, you don't want to go traveling for fun. You're like, I was just out for 6 weeks. I just want to be home.
Yeah.
So like everyone's like, man, you should take a vacation. And I was like, I don't want to go anywhere.
I want a staycation.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you were talking about the teaching, which I think is really a point I want to revisit because you do multiple things. You have you have many different interests.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that in a sense you've, number one, diversified your identity in such a way that you don't feel psychologically compelled to always tour. Mm-hmm. Secondly, with the teaching and with the online course, right? Mm-hmm. Getting out of your own way, which I think could be like, maybe it will be the title of this podcast. So interrelated as it relates to, that was a terrible sentence, but you get the idea. Oblique strategies, the inner game of tennis. I mean, so many of these creative pursuits, professional pursuits, personal pursuits are not about doing something brand new that is this gigantic skill you have to acquire over 15 years. A lot of it is just removing the blocks, right? But the point I was going to make is that you are not in a position, because you've developed these different branches of your life, where you have to feel or act out of desperation. And it makes me think, for instance, this might seem like it's totally out of left field, but Arnold Schwarzenegger never really auditioned. And this is something not a whole lot of people know about him. It's not a secret, but he made millions of dollars in real estate before he ever had his break in film. So he focused on real estate in Santa Monica and other areas, and had also other types of business. He had a mail order business. He had a bricklaying business with Franco Colombo, so that he could be selective about the roles he took.
That's incredible.
And he was able to craft a trajectory even when, so you're talking about the cheese ball taking the gig.
Yeah.
When he got started, people are like, this is never going to work.
Right.
You're a freak show.
Right.
Nobody wants that.
Right.
Like, people want Al Pacino and Taxi. They do not want Taxi Driver. It was Taxi Driver, one of the two. In any case.
Robert De Niro?
Oh, yeah, there we go. Wow. How many ways can I get that story wrong?
We can edit that out.
Yeah. Close enough. This is audio verite, folks. I'll leave it in. Wow. You get the idea.
Yeah.
And he was able to bide his time also, so that at some point he could put himself in a position where he could be exactly what people wanted. And I'll give you public thanks also for, you can see how my brain is connecting these two. For your introduction to Bill Burr,
sure,
comedian who's also on this show, who you teach, who, for people who haven't seen it, does one of the most hilarious Arnold Schwarzenegger bits of all time, which I won't spoil. It is definitely not suitable for work, so don't play it at full volume on YouTube at your job and then get pissed off at me on the internet. But the diversification of identity, psychologically, very, very important. And then the income diversification for you, allowing you to then, as an artist, craft a more deliberate path, I think are really, really,
absolutely,
really, really important.
And if you're not being deliberate about what you're creating, then what the hell are you doing? You're just making garbage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned George. So this is George Daniel, right?
Yep.
Of the 1975. So he has said, and I quote, among other things, I'll read the whole thing. But Dave saved my arms and hands. He made me see I could, in fact, contrary to my belief, develop technique that would save me from blisters and help solve tendonitis for many years of horribly inefficient technique. We don't have to talk about that. We can. But the next line is what's interesting to me. He taught patience, exclamation point. An incredible player, really great teacher, and all-around lovely human. What does that mean, or what does he mean by he taught patience?
I think probably as long as someone is putting the work in, I'm very patient with people, because seeing the light flash in their eyes when something clicks is one of the greatest feelings imaginable. And also probably for him, I think being patient with himself, like taking the time to really hone in on certain things and not having to rush through things and just being like, I'm going to put the work in and I'm going to take the time so all this stuff happens the way it should happen. And you have to be patient with that, or else it's never going to manifest itself.
Or with something that's as physical as drumming. Right? If you rush it and your technique is not biomechanically suitable for a human body, then
that's what I was saying earlier. Is it's inherently an issue of the drum set as an instrument, in that the way the drum set was formed initially around the turn of the century was it was called a trap kit, because it was short for contraption. So like you think of these dudes around late 1800s, 1900s taking disparate concert percussion instruments, like a bass drum by itself and a snare drum, and then they had to make a pedal to use the bass drum, and the hi-hats were originally called low boys because they were on the floor and you only played them with your foot, you didn't play them so it's evolved in this really bizarre, strange way, so it's physically strange. But also the bar is incredibly low in terms of entry. So it's very easy to play drums in the beginning. You sit down and go doot, dat, doot, dat, doot, dat, doot, dat. And you're like, oh, I can play drums. I can do this. I can play along to AC/DC and Michael Jackson. And like, this is great. And so no one thinks about how anything functions because they can already do it. And then they go on tour, and then 10 years later, they're like, oh, my arms are destroyed. Or my hip is destroyed, or my back, because they're doing everything inefficiently or incorrectly. And then also they get stuck as far as the vocabulary goes because they can't express themselves properly because they're in their own way. So a lot of it is inherently part of the instrument itself. And I always use like violin as an example. Like you have to sit there for 6 months just getting your intonation happening. Or saxophone, you have to get your embouchure together.
Your what?
Embouchure.
Embouchure.
Yeah.
What is
so
that?
How it's like basically like throat control, like how you produce air pressure. And that takes a while. You start learning clarinet, or you're squawking all over the place. You have to develop that control, and you can't just sit down and just make a sound. You have to. There's a certain amount of gestation
with drums. You can get the reward without having to develop
immediately.
that body control.
Exactly, and that's the problem. But that's part of the instrument. You know what I was going to say earlier when we were talking about the being able to wear many different hats, do many different things, be deliberate about what you're doing. I was talking to a friend about this, and he was like, "Yeah, if your identity is largely based on what you do for a living, whatever it is, what if you wake up one day and you don't want to do that thing, and then you're like, who am I?"
Yeah,
and that's a mind fuck.
very common.
Yeah,
super common. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think
For people who say like try to retire, and then they're like, oh wait, I've spent 12 hours a day for the last 30 years doing X.
And then you have a whole other black hole where if you're a very important person and you get a lot of respect, and then you retire, you're just some guy.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other thing to deal with.
Yeah.
And then what are you going to do with your life when you just wake up and you're going to play golf all day? You know, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Huh. What would you put on a billboard if you could put, metaphorically, right? A message, a few words, a word, anything on a billboard to get it out to millions of people. He's holding this T-shirt. Slow down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, slow down. It's because generally speaking, so many people need to do that. Slow down, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Just relax.
You can also cover up or hide a lot of your own mistakes and sloppiness from yourself by doing things too quickly.
Absolutely. That's very common in music.
Yeah, very common in music. It's very common in a lot of things. Mm-hmm. When I watch really good, say, boxing instructors, they're always like, slow down in the beginning, certainly.
Sure.
They're just like, look, anybody can flail their arms around so that nobody can see what you're doing exactly. Like,
yep.
I want to see exactly what you're doing really slowly in the beginning. And it also brings to mind one of my favorite expressions I've learned in the last few years, which was from a friend of mine who's a former Navy SEAL. And it's not specific to him. It's something that you hear quite a lot, but it is slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Yeah.
It's just like,
I like
do
that.
not rush. Because if you try to like rush a reload or rush whatever it might be and you botch it, now you're really slow. And
You're slower than you would be even before.
Yeah. Like, yes.
Well, it's the same like the Waitskin shit, the smaller circles.
Yeah.
To learn things in large movements or whatever you want to think about this in, whatever paradigm you want to think about this in. And then as you get more comfortable with it, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And then you're just throw someone across the room.
And for those people wondering, that's Josh Waitskin, who is a fantastic guy, good friend of mine, who's he is the basis for the book and the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. Really a master in many, many disciplines, but that's one of his concepts for sure.
I tell everyone I teach to get that book.
Yeah, The Art of Learning is a fantastic book. He was the second ever guest on this podcast.
Yep.
And a lot of great concepts. Also, for people interested, did a television episode with him where we looked at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which he's a black belt in, among other things. That was the first time for that TV show that he got on in front of a chessboard, and I want to say 15 years, something like that. His wife said, "I cannot believe that he's getting in front of a chessboard. I've never seen him do it."
That thing in the episode where he talks about playing like 50 chess games at the same time.
Yeah, the simultaneous games.
Yeah, and talking about feeling the flow of energy in the room, and then he felt like a shift.
Yeah, he felt like he'd been juggling 30 balls and one of them got dropped because he was playing, it was something like 30 kids, and one of them cheated.
Yes.
And he came back around and he didn't know exactly what had happened, but he's like, this doesn't feel right.
And that sounds like spooky shit. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
That episode was so affirming and exciting for me.
Yeah.
Because he said a lot of things where I was like, oh, I am doing this right.
Yeah.
I'm on the right path, because there were so many things that we did similarly.
The transfer is it's so clear.
Huge.
Which is part of the fun. It's a big part of the fun of having this podcast for me, is interviewing people across disciplines that at first glance you would expect to have nothing to do with one another, and you just realize that people who are playing their A game in any field have more in common with one another than they do with the B players in their own field.
That's one of my favorite things to do with Burr is we sit down and talk about comedy and drumming and the massive amounts of overlap between the two.
Yeah.
Like when we first started working together, he had basically like a John Bonham, Led Zeppelin, almost like a replica kit. He's like a huge Bonham fan. And everyone who plays drums is like a John Bonham fan. He's incredible. And he has a very specific sound. So he got this early 70s Green Sparkle Ludwig kit, giant 26-inch bass drum. Like it's a thing.
Yeah.
It's a very specific thing. And we're working together and we're talking about identity and what he wants to say and who he wants to be and getting his posture together. And I was like, dude, you wouldn't walk out on stage and start yelling like Sam Kinison. That's his thing. You do your own thing. You walk out on stage in front of whatever 12,000 people, Madison Square Garden. You're doing your own thing.
Yeah.
Like bring that to this. And he sold the kit immediately. Got his own thing. He's figuring out what his own thing is.
Yeah.
It's and that's so much fun for me to do. And he's one of the smartest dudes I know. I mean, he's brilliant.
He's a very smart guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have, I think within any field, certainly you have certain philosophical underpinnings or paradigms that people choose as like the foundation for a lot of their decisions and career path and so on. Then you have the strategies and you have the tactics, and the lower level you go, in some respects, the more the fields diverge. Mm-hmm. But certainly at the higher levels, whether it's tennis, comedy, drumming, or otherwise, there's so many commonalities.
Yep.
What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
That I love.
Yeah, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Or just a compulsion. So, for instance, Cheryl Strayed, who wrote the book Wild, and excellent author, also fantastic podcast host. The example she gave was she likes to reassemble sandwiches. So when she gets a sandwich, it bothers her if like all the tomatoes on one side of the sandwich and the avocados on the other. She wants every bite to be as uniform as possible. So she'll like reassemble her sandwich. I like the number 555 because I finished editing the final line and the final pass of the 4-Hour Body in a Samovar tea shop in San Francisco ages ago, and looked up and it was 5:55 p.m. So that became this kind of good luck charm. So I take screenshots of that whenever it pops up. So it could be anything.
It's funny. I think to be good at anything, you need to have a touch of OCD.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You have to be detail oriented. And I do have those things, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head other than like checking the stove 10 times when I'm leaving the house and like, checking my studio door 4 times to make sure it's locked. I can't like think of anything weirdly specific like that at the moment.
No problem. I'm sure there are depths to plumb there that we can return to.
Yeah.
How often do you eat Indian or Himalayan food with some type of curry type consistency?
Every day, pretty much. I mean, that's why I go to the gym 6 days a week, because I have to work off all the clarified butter.
All right, I'll leave that. That may qualify. When you feel, actually, I'm not going to ask that one. Let me go somewhere else.
Sure.
See, one thing that's come up in our conversations recently, because I've never worked with a therapist, and I've listened to interviews you've done where you've mentioned therapy and your therapist, and I've always had, I think, a certain degree of resistance, particularly to talk therapy, for a lot of reasons I won't bore everybody with, and I'd like to talk about that because it seems like you've benefited tremendously from it. So why, if you're comfortable talking about
Sure.
it, why did you end up engaging a therapist, and what have been, how did you choose your therapist, and what have been some of the benefits that you've derived
Sure.
from it so far.
Yeah. I initially.
Because I'll just really continue to step all over your answers.
all good.
You, as well as a few other people, when I have mentioned that I've not worked with a therapist, are just like, what in the fuck? Are you serious?
Especially you. Yeah.
They're like, really? I'm like, okay, maybe this is something I should explore. So
Yeah, absolutely.
This has come up multiple times from multiple people. Your story. Yeah.
So I started seeing a therapist around when I was 30-ish, something like that. And it was mainly to figure out sort of like relationship issues that kept happening over and over and over again. And I was like, there's clearly something here that's a blind spot to me, and I don't know what I'm doing. I need to figure this out. That was the sort of specific reason why I started going. And I found my therapist through a really close friend of mine who is a therapist. And we obviously can't work together because she's a close friend of mine. So she was like, you should see this person. She's incredible. And working with a therapist, having a good relationship with someone where you can really trust them and you care about each other and it clicks. That is unbelievably important. There are so many bad drum teachers out there, and there are so many bad therapists out there, and it can be extremely damaging to someone. So having a good therapist who you get along with and connect with, and who's very competent, like that's why I picked someone who was. I mean, we hit it off, and it was obvious. But she's 80. Yeah. And it's like all these life coaches running around who are like 25. It's like, the fuck do you know? You don't know anything. So having a therapist where I can bring up anything and she's like, yep, been there.
Right.
That's huge.
Yeah.
And so it started off with the relationship stuff, and then it obviously shoots off in all these other different directions. And even just having someone to go in and dump on and just like brain vomit, who's only there to help you out, help you sort things out. The world would be a completely different place if everyone had a safe
outlet.
Yeah, to just unload.
What are some of the ingredients for success, say, in the beginning? Would you say that it was important to you to, say, meet every week for a certain period of time, given how much you could potentially travel, right?
Sure.
Like, what were some of the things that made it work?
Well, it's the same thing with drumming. I'm like, hey, look, if you're serious about this, we got to do this once a week, because it's like going to the gym. You don't go 2 days a week for 4 hours. Right. You go once a week or every day. You go every day for an hour or something, right? Yeah. It's you have consistency. That's crucial, and you're able to make progress because it's a recurring dialogue you're having with someone. And so I went once a week for years, and when things got particularly messy, I would sometimes go twice a week. And there were times when she really saved my life, like dealing with PTSD, or you literally feel like you're going to die. Yeah. And now I go once a month, and sort of check in. And what's funny, we were talking about this last night. The times when I'm like, everything's kind of cool. Like, I don't even really need to go today. Those are the times when you stumble into some massive paradigm shift. And it literally is, it's a paradigm shift. You see the world in a completely different way. And a lot of the times when that happens, it's funny. I'll just be talking out loud, like thinking, but verbalizing it. And you sort of get on a path, and then you're like, boom, and something happens. And you're just like, holy shit, like, where did that come from? Yeah. It's almost like an out-of-body experience. So a lot of it is trying to get outside of yourself, and which is extremely difficult. And thinking about, well, is this aspect of my personality, is this learned from my parents or someone else, or is this part of me? And a lot of things that I didn't know I was even doing are learned things that can be unlearned. Yeah. It might take a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm a completely different person, like a very specific example that's like something small. If I'm at the gym and someone re-racks their weights improperly, it drives me fucking bananas. It drives me crazy. Like if they take the 25s and
put it on the 35.
Oh my God. Drives me crazy. And it's like, this could not be more black and white. Like how is that acceptable?
Yeah.
And then that fucks up the flow for everyone else.
Yeah.
So, and one day she was like, well, they didn't see that you were wearing your invisible police uniform. They just didn't see it. And I was like, and I start laughing and I'm like, oh my God, you're totally right. Like feeling this need to police everyone and it's obviously a need for control.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a learned thing.
Yeah.
And that's something that I constantly have to check myself about, and if you and that'll take you out, because there's so many things like that on the daily.
I mean, hundreds, thousands,
right? And they're everywhere.
Why does this guy not know how to use his chip reader on his
Yeah, or like, why did you park like an asshole? Yeah. It's mostly like people being inconsiderate that drives me crazy.
I have one friend, I'm not sure he'd want to be named explicitly, so I won't mention his name. He's a very, very brilliant guy in his field, and when he goes through TSA and airport security, it drives him completely fucking bananas when people don't know how to go through security. And they'll leave their belt on, or they'll have like a huge container of water after the person has asked them 4 times if they have any liquids. Yeah. So what he's started to do, he's been also very recently seeing a therapist and has figured out certain coping mechanisms. And so one of his coping mechanisms, which I think is really hilarious, is he will say something like, he will become the voice that he imagines they have that is 30 feet away. So he'll go, "What do you mean I can't take water on the airplane? Last time I was here, I could bring my computer through the metal detector." And he'll do this. And so I remember asking him at one point, I was like, "Oh, that's really funny. So that's what you say to yourself?" He's like, "No, that's what I say out loud." And he says, "I say it loud enough so that everybody around me can hear it." And people start laughing and like chill the fuck out.
It's a way to diffuse it.
I think he just did it initially because he thought it was hilarious and uncomfortable to say it out loud. But now he's become like the stand-up comedian at the back of the line. And I now know at least a half a dozen people who have spent time with him who now do the same thing.
That's hilarious.
But it's the little things that are the big things, right?
Well, and it's also like, why would it's also for like TSA employees drive me bananas. I travel a lot, and a lot of them are totally incompetent. So, but it's like going to anything where you have to deal with someone in that type of a job.
Yeah,
you go, wait, why would this person be competent?
Yeah,
a competent person wouldn't have this job in the first place. So why am I expecting that to begin with? I'm setting myself up to get angry.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's the small things we think about. These big existential dilemmas and questions, but it's in so many cases that stuff is important, or it can be important, but it's also like, are you giving yourself like 100 pats on the back in your day, or are you giving yourself 100 paper cuts? Because you have ample opportunity for both. And
what we're talking about might sound trivial, but you stack all of those things up and they'll take you out.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh my God. We will at some point, maybe tonight over some wine, come back to more unusual and absurd things that you love, because I'm sure there is a treasure trove.
Yeah.
1 or 2 last questions. You've mentioned a few books here that you gifted to me, which are very, very timely, but are there any particular books that you've given the most as gifts to other people?
The Andre Agassi Open book is phenomenal.
Incredible book. Even if you don't care about tennis at all, it is an incredible book.
I tweeted years ago, I was like, hey, does anyone know any good sports psychology books like directly related to tennis or golf? Because I was really fascinated with those. Even I don't really give a shit about sports, really. but I was really fascinated because this psychological warfare you have to navigate by yourself is the same as when the red light's on in the studio. I have to do these film scores where you have to sight read everything. You've never seen it before. They throw up a book.
Sight reading is you've never played it.
You've never seen the music before. They throw up the sheet music and you have to play it perfectly the first time because you have to do the whole movie in a day.
Jesus.
Right? So it's very, very stressful. So it's the same. It's the same.
Including films like Trolls, The Book of Love, others.
Logan, that Wolverine movie.
So good.
Yeah. That St. Vincent movie with Bill Murray a few years ago. That all the Divergent, Insurgent.
But like same, but different, right? In terms of the sports, the tennis, the golf.
Yeah, like when you hit the ball in the sand and you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
And you can't, and you have to go, just leave it be, and you can't let that ruin the whole game.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing when the red light's on in the studio or when you're on playing in front of 30,000 people. It's the same. You screw something up, you can't be like, oh, and let it screw up the whole show. It's the same exact thing. I thought that was fascinating.
So was the Agassi book recommended as a result of that
Yeah.
post you put up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible.
It's
so
a tremendous book.
I give that to people all the time. The Art of Learning, I give to people all the time.
Josh Waitzkin.
Yep. I give the Inner Game of Tennis. I give Zen in the Art of Archery to people all the time. I feel like that was the very first book that spawned all of these Zen in the Art of...
Fill in the blank.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Just so popular now. God, I need to look at my bookcase. There's so many.
Horton Hears a Who. Last but not least.
There's so many.
You are one of the best read people I've met in the last, I would say, 5 years, which is saying a lot.
Yeah,
'Cause
thanks.
I meet a lot of people who read very widely, and this has been so much fun.
Yeah.
We could go on for many, many more hours, so maybe we'll do that at some point. But where are some of the best places for people to find you? We talked about DaveElitch.com, Instagram, Twitter at Dave Elitch. There are other social profiles, I'm sure, but it seems like maybe those are the best. The online course, which is really stunningly shot and very well done, Getting Out of Your Own Way. That's available at
DaveElitch.com. Yeah.
Any other places where people can find you that you'd like them to pay attention to, or any other recommendations or asks of the audience, people who are listening?
Well, the easiest place to find me is Instagram, just Dave Elitch, or my website. You can contact me through my website. I'm not super active on Twitter or Facebook anymore. Someone else who a lot of books I recommend are Douglas Copeland's books. He wrote Generation X. He coined the
Coupland,
term.
Couplan.
Yeah, he's also an equally amazing visual artist, which is incredibly rare. I find a ton of inspiration from him. He's great. So I recommend a lot of his books. Generation X is great, like social commentary from like the early 90s.
And he coined that term.
Yeah.
Generation X.
He's an interesting sort of social tech theorist. I think he has a job at Google now.
Very well could.
Yeah,
They tend to gather interesting, eclectic folks.
Yeah, he's an interesting dude. Those are the two best places to contact me: my website or Instagram. And if anyone hears this and there's sort of kindred spirits in terms of what motivates us, or in terms of any sort of creative endeavor, reach out and say, hey.
Lob out a note or a hand wave through the ether.
Yeah.
That is the interwebs. Dave, so awesome to finally get you on.
Yeah, same, dude.
Many, many adventures ahead. I'm excited for you. I'm hoping to pop in to the masterclass tomorrow, which I will be completely unqualified for, but nonetheless, as a fly on the wall.
Awesome.
I really look forward to that. And before I forget, Daughters of Mara.
Yeah.
Is Mara? I've never thought to ask this, but is that a reference to the Hindu god? No.
I think it's Buddha. Buddhist.
Yeah, it's Buddhist.
Yeah.
Mara, who's sort of the equivalent of
the devil. Yeah. So we had 3 daughters that would sort of tempt people, sort of like the snake in the Garden of Eden, that equivalent.
Daughters of Mara.
Yeah, that was a band I was in 2005, 6, 7. That was on Virgin Capitol Records and did a record, and then EMI got bought out by Terra Firma, and that was that.
I Am Destroyer. Appropriate.
Yeah, very relevant. Little did we know.
Dave Smash. All right. Everybody listening, as always, you can find links to all the things we talked about, including, say, the crazy Mars Volta video. And we will also look up a few other things, like the books that, in addition to the Pia Melody book, the other books, perhaps some of the books that your therapist has on her mantle, and the Mankind Existential Animal quote, etc. will all be in the show notes. You can also find links certainly to Getting Out of Your Own Way and everything related to Dave at tim.blog/podcast. And until next time, thank you for listening. Hey guys, this is Tim again. Just a few more things before you take off. Number 1, this is 5 Bullet Friday. Do you want to get a short email from me? Would you enjoy getting a short email from me every Friday that provides a little morsel of fun before the weekend? And 5 Bullet Friday is a very short email where I share the coolest things I've found or that I've been pondering over the week. That could include favorite new albums that I've discovered. It could include gizmos and gadgets and all sorts of weird shit that I've somehow dug up in the world of the esoteric as I do. It could include favorite articles that I've read and that I've shared with my close friends, for instance. And it's very short. It's just a little tiny bite of goodness before you head off for the weekend. So if you want to receive that, check it out. Just go to 4hourworkweek.com. That's 4hourworkweek.com, all spelled out, and just drop in your email, and you will get the very next one. And if you sign up, I hope you enjoy it. This episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible provides an unbeatable selection of audiobooks, including bestsellers, how-to, mysteries, thrillers, memoirs, and more. I've used Audible for many years, and I have a few audiobooks to recommend right off the bat. Number 1, Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. So listen to the book that caught the attention of Spielberg enough to get made into a major film. The writing is fantastic. Tau Seneca by Seneca the Younger. This is a collection of letters, my favorite compilation of letters of all time that I've recommended the most of all the books I've ever read. And The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This is the fiction book that I use to convert nonfiction purists into fiction lovers. I like the version that Neil reads himself, but that's just me. He has a hypnotic voice. I also recently enjoyed Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, which was recommended to me by best-selling author Neil Strauss. Make sure to get the audiobook version, and you will recognize it by the peace sign on the cover. And as an Audible subscriber, you can choose 3 titles every month, 1 audiobook and 2 Audible originals you can't hear anywhere else. And there's some really, really cool stuff among the Audible originals. You can listen on any device, anytime, anywhere, at home, at the gym, while you're cooking, on your commute, or wherever. I often listen to audiobooks when I'm walking my pooch or on the way to the gym, so on and so forth. You'll also enjoy easy audiobook exchanges. In other words, if you don't like what you buy, and you're like, buyer's remorse, you can swap it. Rollover credits. So if you don't use credits in a given month, they roll over into the next. And an audiobook library you keep forever, even if you cancel. This last part is important. Unlike, say, a streaming or rental service, with Audible, you own your books, even if you cancel your membership. And right now, for a limited time, you can get 3 months of Audible for just $6.95 a month. That's $6.95 a month. And that is also more than half off the regular price. So give yourself the gift of listening. And while you're at it, think about giving the gift of Audible to someone on your list. For more, go to audible.com/Tim, T-I-M that is, audible.com/Tim, or text Tim, T-I-M, to 500-500. This episode is brought to you by FreshBooks. FreshBooks has become the go-to cloud accounting software for literally millions of small business owners who found a faster, more efficient, and much less stressful way to deal with their numbers. And ultimately, this helps you to focus on what you are best at. It is used by many of the fastest growing startups I've invested in or advised, and it's equally used by many of the best freelancers I work with on a daily or weekly basis. It is one of the easiest ways to send invoices, get paid, track your time, and track your clients. If you're self-employed and managing business sometimes means wrestling with spreadsheets, crumpled receipts, and other scattered pieces, FreshBooks can really help. FreshBooks allows you to do many, many different things very easily. Preparing and sending a polished branded invoice takes about 30 seconds. You can set yourself up to receive online payments from your clients in about 2 clicks, which on average will get you paid twice as fast. Their new proposals feature means you can include a project summary and timeline as part of your estimate. There are many, many other things. Tracking your time. The quick proposals that I mentioned, formatting free, super easy, late payment reminders so you don't have to chase people, automated expenses, sharing files and messages with your clients, award-winning customer service. They are extremely responsive, the interface is super intuitive, and there's almost no learning curve. So, in short, it's easy, it saves you time. And right now, FreshBooks is offering an unrestricted 30-day free trial for all of my listeners. To claim yours, check it out. Go to freshbooks.com/Tim and enter Tim Ferriss in the How Did You Hear About Us section. And that is funky spell TIMFERRISS. So again, go to freshbooks.com/Tim and enter Tim Ferriss in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Check it out.